Have you ever wondered what happens to the soul in the first moments after death? Does it ascend immediately, or does it get stuck between two worlds? What if I told you that a man died in an ambulance, spent 3 days wandering the earth, and came back with frightening revelations about what happens to millions of souls after death? In today's video, you will hear the shocking story of Ethan Clark, a paramedic from the United States who had a shocking near-death experience and saw with his own eyes what Jesus showed about how long the soul can be trapped here. Get ready for a real, moving, and revealing story that may change the way you see life and death. Leave your like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and comment below which city you're watching us from, because I want to see how far this message will go. My name is Ethan Clark. I'm 38 years old. I live in Toledo, Ohio, and I've been working as a paramedic for over 15 years. I thought I'd seen it all. Horrific accidents, sudden cardiac arrests, silent goodbyes in the back of an ambulance. But nothing, absolutely nothing, nothing prepared me for what I myself experienced. It was a cold January night. We were responding to a simple call, an elderly man with chest pain. On the way back inside the ambulance, I began to feel a burning sensation in my chest. I thought it was stress. I had ignored the exhaustion for weeks. But in seconds, the heat turned into a fever. Agony. My left arm went numb. I tried to scream, but my voice wouldn't come out. And then everything stopped. The sensation was as if I had been plunged into absolute silence. I felt no impact, no pain, no sound. Just sudden darkness, followed by something I will never forget. I was standing, looking at myself lying on the ambulance stretcher. The red lights were flashing. The radio was screaming code blue, and my partner was desperately trying to revive me. I saw everything, I heard everything. I felt everything except my body. It was like watching my own death and without being able to intervene. I tried to move. I tried to touch my partner's arm. My hand passed through his. I had no weight. I had no shape. But my consciousness was there, awake, active, confused. I screamed, I cried, but the sound died inside me. And then something very strange began to happen. Time seemed to slow down, as if the world was spinning in slow motion. But the scariest thing was realizing that I wasn't leaving. I was stuck, still there, next to the ambulance, following my own body. For days. The first night I followed my body to the hospital. I saw everything. Doctors, nurses, my wife coming in desperate, sobbing. I was by her side, wanting to hug her, to scream that I was there, but I couldn't. I was just a presence, an echo floating between two worlds. On the second day, my body was transferred to the morgue, and I went along, as if something kept me chained to matter. There were other presences there, shadows, figures that moved without a defined shape. Some were crying, others were screaming, and one of them looked at me. That's when I realized that I wasn't the only one who had gotten stuck, and that's when everything started to change. I can't forget the faces or what was left of them. They were like shadows, distorted human silhouettes, trapped in the same space I was in. In the morgue, the cold was physical and spiritual. A cold that permeated everything, even the soul. And there, in the middle of that silent darkness, I saw that I was not alone. At first, I thought it was a hallucination, but those entities were conscious. They crawled around as if they were in agony. Some screamed names that no one responded to. Others walked in circles, lost in time. I felt their pain as if it were my own. It was like being in a vibrating limbo of silent despair. One of them approached. It was a woman, or what was left of one. Her face was half vanished, as if it were melting into mist. But her eyes screamed something that I understood without words. You weren't taken either, were you? It was at that moment that I understood. The soul can indeed remain trapped on earth, and worse, this happens more than we think. But why? Began to notice a pattern. All of these souls, myself included, seemed stuck in something unresolved. It was as if we were suspended between matter and light, waiting for, what? Forgiveness? Acceptance? Liberation? In my case, I still didn't know the reason, but something inside me said that my staying here was not a mistake, it was a warning, a kind of spiritual window, a last call. And the most frightening thing, the time I would stay there depended on what I would understand. On the third day, I realized that some of these souls disappeared. They disappeared as if they were sucked into an invisible whirlpool. Others remained there, for years, decades, trapped. I began to despair. What would stop me from becoming one of those deformed figures? Would the memory of my failures, of the mistakes I had made, keep me in that state forever? What if no one came to get me? It was then, in the midst of that growing fear, a light broke through the ceiling of the morgue as if to cut the very fabric of reality. A light so alive, so conscious that I knelt down even without a body, and from it someone descended. I had no doubt who it was. Jesus. It wasn't a church image, it wasn't symbolic, it was him, pure, bright, real. And he looked at me, not with disapproval, but with a look that pierced me through and through. That's when, without opening his mouth, he spoke straight to my soul. You are still here because you need to see what many refuse to see. And then the world around me began to fade away like smoke. And the truth behind that trapped time began to be revealed. Jesus' presence was overwhelming, not in a scary way, but in a real way. He didn't need to use words to show me things. Everything was transmitted in direct consciousness, as if he placed a mirror inside me and said, "Now look." The light around intensified, and suddenly I was ripped from that morgue and thrown into a dimension that seemed to exist between time and space. It was as if I was floating inside the mind of God, surrounded by memories, emotions, and choices. Jesus showed me scenes from my life that I had buried, little moments that I thought were insignificant. A cold word spoken to my mother in the hospital, a help denied to a hungry stranger, the pent-up anger I pretended not to feel. These weren't monstrous sins. They were the daily omissions of love. And there, in that dimension where time does not exist, I understood the first great revelation. The soul is not trapped by punishment. It is trapped by consequence. Like a bird that still has wings, but has forgotten how to fly. Jesus then made me look back, literally. When I turned around, I saw a kind of golden cord, like an invisible thread still connecting me to my body. But more than that, I saw that there were people calling me, praying for me, crying for me, trying, let go of me. And then came the second revelation. The prayers of the living have the power to free the dead. At that moment, my daughter's voice echoed in that space of light. She was only 8 years old and was kneeling beside the bed saying, "Jesus, give me back Daddy, but if he doesn't come back, please take care of him." That broke me. The light around me trembled, and it was as if Jesus said to me with his eyes, "See, love is the only force that cuts the bonds." I understood then that many of the trapped souls I had seen before were not expecting a trial, but a gesture of forgiveness, a prayer, an emotional release. Some were trapped by guilt, others by attachment, many by fear, and some by hate. That moment I felt something break inside me, as if the chains of my soul had been torn from within. It wasn't Jesus who did this, it was my consciousness, awakening. Jesus then pointed down, and it was like seeing the earth from above. Thousands, millions of points of dim light, floating between worlds, lost souls who didn't know they could go. Death is a door, Ethan, but you only go through it when you understand that you no longer need to carry the weight that ties you to the world. I cried like I had never cried in my life. Tears without a body, but that flowed down my soul, because at that moment, I knew I was still trapped. But not for long. That revelation was an earthquake inside me. Everything I thought I knew about death was wrong. I thought it was a clean cut. The soul goes up or down or disappears. But what Jesus was showing me was much more complex and at the same time, too simple for human pride to accept. It's not judgment that binds the soul to the earth, Ethan, his voice inside me said. It's the resistance of the spirit itself. I began to feel the weight of my unresolved emotions like energetic currents around what I had previously considered invisible, hurts that I had never released, words that I had swallowed, guilt for having failed my father, for not having forgiven my sister, for having let my faith rust in years of weariness and cynicism. Each memory carried a vibration, and that vibration kept me there. Jesus then led me to a shocking vision, a hospital with dozens of recently disembodied souls wandering the corridors, while the living cried around the bodies. Some souls tried to speak, scream, touch their loved ones. Others simply did not accept that they had died. When the soul refuses to accept death, it does not depart. A nurse who had died hours before was desperately trying to continue her shift without realizing that she no longer had a body. A driver who had died in an accident was banging on the windows of his own car in an eternal loop as if he were still trying to stop the inevitable. And I was there, among them, still trapped, still watching, still trying to understand. It was at that moment that Jesus revealed something even more profound to me, something that took the breath away from my soul. There are souls that remain trapped for 3 days, others for 3 years, some for centuries, not as punishment, but because they refuse to let go of the life that has already passed. These words exploded inside me. I remembered how many times, even in life, I refused to forgive. How many times I held on to hurts as if they were medals. How many opportunities for love I let pass me by for fear of appearing weak. Each of these choices created invisible knots who were now holding me. And Jesus showed me with immense pain in his eyes, not because he judged me, but because he knew I could have been free even before death. There, in that dimension between worlds, I understood that death is not a guaranteed liberation. It is a door that only opens with the right keys: forgiveness, detachment, awareness, love. And that's when I looked again at my body, now in a closed coffin, at the wake, and I realized that something was about to happen. A presence was approaching from behind Jesus, a presence I knew, a presence I loved, and a presence I hadn't seen since I was 12 years old. My grandmother. The light around Jesus began to expand, as if the air itself became aware. That's when I smelled lavender, the same smell that came from my grandmother's clothes when I was a child. For a moment I couldn't believe it, but that presence, it was unmistakable. She emerged slowly, leaving the light as if walking from eternity to the present. My grandmother Helen. He died when I was 12 years old, victim of a massive stroke. I never got over that loss. I never got to say goodbye properly. There, between plans, she appeared as a figure of soft light with a serene face and teary eyes. It was her, and it still was. My grandma, but with a vibration that made me tremble inside, a mixture of love, truth, and spiritual authority. She reached out and took my hands, or whatever was the equivalent of hands in that dimension. And it was as if, for a moment, all the despair, fear, and confusion had been sucked away. My dear Ethan, you stayed because you needed to understand. But now the time has come to choose. She spoke no words. No mouth moved. But everything was clearer than any sound. The words came straight to my spirit. My grandmother showed me the moment of her own death, how she was also trapped for 2 days, until she was able to free herself. She explained that her attachment to the granddaughter she was raising and me had prevented her from leaving immediately. It was only when she saw me smile again at the age of 14 that she was able to cross the threshold of light. You see, Ethan, what holds us back is not sin, it's bonds, the fear of leaving behind what no longer belongs to us. It was at that moment that she put something in my hands. It was like a flame. It didn't burn, it was alive, and it pulsed. "That's your last pending matter," she said. "You need to forgive yourself." Those words tore at me. I had always blamed myself for my father's death. I was on duty that day, and I arrived too late. I always felt that if I had driven faster, he would have survived. I had kept that guilt bottled up inside me for over 10 years. And now it was the anchor that kept me from leaving. I started crying, and my grandmother hugged me for the first time since her death. And in that embrace, everything that was dark began to dissolve. "You're not dying, Ethan. You're being reborn." Jesus approached again, with an even more intense glow, and with a look that said it. "How here now you know. The soul is only free when it understands what kept it trapped." The light opened like a portal, but before I could step through it, Jesus showed me something even more shocking. A row of souls trapped in places that looked like their old homes, hospitals, even police stations, all of them trapped by unresolved stories. Some have been there for centuries. "You will come back, Ethan, and you will tell the world." And that's when everything exploded into light. The explosion of light was not violent. It was like to be born again into such a great truth that my old self could never have endured. I floated on waves of consciousness, as if I were immersed in an ocean of living wisdom. And then Jesus spoke once more, not with words, but with vibrations that passed through my soul. "You've seen what many refuse to see, Ethan. Now you need to understand why this happens." The scenes before me changed, as if an invisible screen was being projected onto the very fabric of space. I began to watch the stories of other souls, different lives and deaths, but tied by the same invisible strings. I saw a man who died of cancer, but his soul remained in the basement of the house where he had lived, repeating the same desperate prayer for forgiveness for years. I saw a young woman who died in a car accident and refused to leave because I couldn't accept that I had died so soon. I saw a police officer who refused to leave his post, even without a body, patrolling invisible streets. The mind is still active, Ethan. Even after death, the soul carries everything that has not been resolved, like baggage. Jesus showed me that freedom of the soul is not an automatic gift of death. It is an achievement of consciousness. The passage to the full spiritual plane only happens when the soul releases everything that ties you to the density of the earth. Unhealed guilt, unresolved anger, attachment to matter, to people, to places, fear of judgment. Each of these forces acts as invisible shackles, and contrary to what many people think, there is no imposed penance. There is only the reflection of what we choose not to transform into life. I began to understand something even deeper. The soul that remains is not punished. It is anesthetized, without realizing that it can fly because it has learned to crawl. I also saw how some souls managed to free themselves. I saw a man who was able to rise at the exact moment his son forgave him his mistakes in his funeral speech. I saw a woman who was enveloped in light as she listened to her granddaughter's prayers every day for 7 years. I saw forgiveness, tears, deliverance. Jesus showed me that every gesture of love coming from the living generates vibrational waves that touch the dead. And then, he said to me, "You stayed 3 days, Ethan, because that was all it took for your soul to accept the truth. Some people stay in eternity, and some people leave in a second." The light around began to spin like a whirlwind of stars. It was the vortex of the definitive passage, and I felt that I had understood enough to go back. "But before you leave, Jesus gave me something, a small sphere of light, pulsating, alive, warm. This is spiritual memory. Take it with you, and awaken those who still sleep." The next second, my body shook on the autopsy table. What happened next was the kind of thing I wouldn't have believed in 1,000 lifetimes if I hadn't experienced it. My body, already lifeless for more than 40 minutes, lying in the cold room of the morgue of the Central Hospital of Toledo, started to move. First the fingers, then the eyes, and then a sigh, strong, heavy, like someone emerging from a dive into the depths of the universe. The doctors and coroners were in shock. Some screamed, others ran to the monitors trying to make sense of the impossible. But I knew I was no longer coming back as the Ethan who had died. Something inside me had changed forever. It wasn't just a near-death experience. It was a call, engraved in my soul. I had no choice, and honestly, I didn't even want to, because returning was part of the mission. That sphere of light that Jesus gave me was still with me. Not physically, but like a living vibration within my being. Something that burned and reminded me of everything I had seen, felt, and understood. And along with that flame came the final revelation. You were allowed to remember. What does this mean? Most people who experience NDEs forget details or experience their experiences as if they were distorted dreams. But not me. Everything was intact, as if I had lived for years in a place where time does not exist, and returned, with the memory of every second. In the following days, as I recovered physically, I had one unshakable certainty. I needed to tell what I saw, because the world needed to know that. The soul can indeed be trapped. The time after death is not the end, but a mirror. And the key to liberation is always internal. No one gave me a list of commandments. No one demanded perfection from me. What Jesus showed me was something much simpler and more frightening. You have lived so long running from your mission that only death could stop you. Now, use what you have seen to prevent others from being trapped like you were. My mind tried to rationalize, but my soul knew. I had experienced the truth that lives behind the veil of death. And it doesn't matter whether you believe it or not. The truth is that there are millions of souls wandering, not because they are lost, but because they don't know they can be found. And maybe, just maybe, you who are listening to me now also need to let something out. Why sometimes those who are alive are already half-trapped. After my return, the images, sensations, and revelations would not leave me alone. It was as if I was still connected to that other plane, living in two worlds at the same time. The doctors called me a miracle. My colleagues were in shock, but I knew it wasn't a miracle. It was a mission. People would ask me, "Have you seen the sky?" And the answer I have for that is something that will far beyond what any doctrine would dare to say. Yes, I saw what you would call heaven, but it was not a fixed place with streets of gold and gates of pearl. It was a state of consciousness, a vibration of peace so absolute that it is only possible when there are no longer any emotional chains holding you back. Heaven is the result of the soul that has freed itself from everything that weighed it down. What about hell? I saw it too. But it was not made of fire. It was made of memory. Repeated memory, recycled pain, constant regret. It was a spiritual loop where souls relived their worst mistakes, their greatest guilt, as if they were trapped in an endless tape. There were no demons. There was no divine punishment. What there was consciousness itself, judging itself. Hell is the echo of everything we didn't want to face in life. And the most disturbing thing? It starts while you're still alive. Many people are already living this hell now, carrying old anger, unhealed wounds, addictions of the soul. That's when I understood why Jesus showed me so many souls trapped, wandering in the places they knew, because what we call a ghost is often just that, a soul in suffering unaware that it can go. And the most unbelievable, some of these souls don't want to go. They are so afraid of what they will find on the other side that they prefer to stay stuck to walls, objects, routines, people. I saw spirits who spent days inside houses watching their families unable to say goodbye. I saw others trapped in scenes of their death, reliving the trauma over and over. Jesus told me something that stuck with me like a hot iron. The greatest suffering of the soul is not dying. It is continuing to exist without knowing what to do with one's own pain. That's why I came back. To tell you that death is not the end, but neither is it the automatic paradise we were promised. It is a mirror, a faithful reflection of the life we choose to lead. And if we don't start freeing ourselves in life, we run the risk of being trapped for a time that not even angels can measure. Before my NDE, I thought the soul left the body and simply went ahead. But what I experienced revealed to me a much more complex reality, and, in a way, disturbing. Time, on the other side, doesn't work like it does here. While my body was technically dead for less than an hour, my consciousness lived the equivalent of 3 days in another dimension. 3 days where I thought. I reviewed my whole life. I connected with spiritual entities, received teachings, and saw souls in completely different situations, some free, others trapped for centuries. The time of the soul is not chronological. It is emotional. Jesus showed me this clearly with a phrase that resonates with me to this day. The spirit does not count hours. It measures time by how much it still needs to understand. That's why even outside human time, I stayed there for 3 days. Not because God made me wait, but because I still needed to understand, forgive, let go. During this period, I felt everything with an intensity that cannot be put into words. Missing my daughter, regret for the conversations I put off, the pain of not having said, I love you more often, and the fear that it was too late. The most curious thing is that in this spiritual time, I wasn't in ghost mode just observing the physical world. I was living a process. A kind of emotional gravity still held me to earth, and this gravity was formed by my unhealed attachments. Jesus showed me that some souls are trapped for minutes, others for millennia, and that this depends not on divine justice but on one's own conscience. The apple only goes up when he accepts that he can leave. I also saw that places where violent or very sudden deaths occur tend to hold the souls for longer. The shock of the breakup is so great that many do not accept that they have died. They stay, wandering, watching, trying to understand. This is not a myth. It is not superstition. It is a spiritual reality, hidden from human eyes, but that vibrates around us. Jesus then gave me one last teaching as if sealing a mission. The soul can be trapped, but it can also be freed by the truth. And it was at that moment that I realized I didn't come back just to tell what I saw. I came back to free, to tell people who live with hurts, hatreds, and invisible chains that liberation begins in life. And if you are waiting for death to be free from pain, maybe get stuck in the same dark hallway I was in. At the end of that journey between worlds, with the presence of Jesus still vibrating around me, the revelation came that would seal everything I had experienced. The soul is not trapped by punishment. It is trapped by misunderstood love. Those words disarmed everything inside me. Jesus took me to the most intimate moment of my life, a banal scene that happened when I was 17 years old. My mother was crying in the kitchen after an argument with me. I ignored her. I locked myself in my room. I never apologized. She died 2 years later, and too carried that guilt in silence for 20 years. There, in that spiritual dimension, it was as if that moment became an anchor. I saw, felt, and understood. That also held me back. The soul is not only bound by great sins, it is held by emotional ties that we cannot untie. Hurts, secrets, unspoken words, goodbyes that never happened. Jesus then showed me one last image. Thousands of souls floating above the world, invisible, attached to houses. People, photos, diaries, open wounds. Some didn't even know they had died, others knew, but still expected something impossible. An apology that would never come. A forgiveness that was never offered. A chance that would no longer be available. These souls do not need punishment, he told me. They need to be reminded that they can still choose freedom. It was then that the light around me began to recede. The presence of Jesus was moving away, but left an eternal echo within me, as if its essence was now impregnated in my very soul. Go back, Ethan, and tell them the time the soul spends on earth is the time it takes to understand what it did not understand in life. In that instant, like a final breath, I was pulled back into my body. The morgue was already silent, but my heart beat. I was alive, breathing, with the most urgent mission of my life. And if you are here listening to me until now, it is not by chance. I went to the other side. I saw souls trapped for centuries, for seconds, for memories. And I came back to say, liberation does not begin after death. It begins now. If there is something you need to forgive, release it. If there is something you haven't said, say it. If you are living on autopilot, cord. Because the time of the soul is not counted on clocks. It is told in understood truths. And when the last truth is accepted, you will finally be free to go. If you liked this beautiful spiritual testimony, leave a like, comment your impressions, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to activate the notification bell to watch each new video and help us spread this message to a greater number of people. Until next time.